My vegetable garden is my dirt lab where I get to have lots of fun and experiment with growing different veggies in different ways. One group of veggies that I love to grow are vertical veggies, which are climbing veggies that I can grow upwards. Now, as our gardens get smaller and as we're looking for ways to be more creative, growing vegetables in the vertical plane becomes even more important because they take up less of our ground space. So these are some of my favourite vertical veggies that I've grown this year. Now this first one is a Tromboncino. Now it doesn't look like it, but it's actually a climbing zucchini, and it grows this long straight stem and creates this large rounded base. Now they're a weird and wonderful vegetable to grow because if they get tangled in something as they're growing, they don't grow long and straight like this one, they grow in quite a curly way like this one here has, or this one here. Now the great thing about Tromboncinos is you can eat them when they're small and they're about 30 to 60 centimetres long. But if you let them grow long like this one and you wait till the vine dies off, the colour of them will go to like a butternut colour. And at that point you can actually store them in a cellar and they'll last all year round. I've actually got some in my cellar that I put away last May and they've gone nearly for 12 months of the year. You use them as you would a zucchini, you can use them for cakes in any manner, or they also are fabulous for making a chocolate zucchini cake. I actually prefer them because they have a pale flesh. I use them with white chocolate and I make a white chocolate Tromboncino cake. Delicious. So that means you can enjoy a summer vegetable in winter and spring at the opposite time of the year. Now this is another type of squash. This is a spaghetti squash. Now the vine's dying off now with powdery mildew, but it's the end of the season. But these can be eaten fresh, or they can also be stored in the cellar and they'll last for up to 12 months. Now the way you eat them is you either steam them or bake them, and then you scrape the flesh out with a fork, and the flesh appears like fine vermicelli. So it's quite an interesting vegetable and easy to grow, and you can see how well they grew quite high, nearly 2 metres high. This is Malabar or climbing spinach. It loves the heat and doesn't really take off till about December, but then it will grow up to 2.5 metres high. Now I've got a whole wall of it, which is more than I really need to eat, but I'm fascinated to see how it performs. It takes radiant heat off corrugated iron or even brick. It has pretty little flowers. It also has dark reddish purpley black berries, which you can use for dyeing. But how you eat the leaves is you choose nice medium-sized leaves, and these ones can be eaten raw in a salad. They've got a nice crunch to them, which is quite enjoyable. Or you can use any size leaves cooked as you would spinach. Now the one thing about them is they have a slightly mucilaginous texture, which is a bit different, but for people that live in tropical areas, this is the only spinach they know, and it's perfect. This is my number one favourite vegetable. It's a New Guinea bean, known as cucuzza to the Italians, lauki or duty to the Indians. It's beloved by the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, all sorts of different cultures around the world revere it. Now you can actually use it sort of like a zucchini. It's a climbing edible squash, but I love to use it in stir fries, in curries, in stews, anything like that. The interesting thing about its flesh is you can either pick the fruits when they're young and they're 30 to 60 centimetres long and you won't need to peel them. Once they get big like this, you will need to peel them. But if you cut them into cubes and say put them into a curry, you could be reheating that curry in 2 or 3 days. And the vegetable in there will still have texture, which obviously if you used a zucchini, it would go to mush and be yucky. So this is a wonderful vegetable. I also make a New Guinea bean cake, which is amazing. But it's quick growing, it grows beautifully over an arch or a mesh panel, and it loves the heat. I love pumpkins, and I'm fascinated by the fact there are so many different types you can grow. But this year I wanted to try growing them upwards. So I grew them on these panels. Now these are 2.5 metres high, and you can see how well they've grown. Now obviously the vine's dying off at the moment, which is what it does. It gets powdery mildew. But you leave the pumpkins on the vine as long as you can if you want to store them. When the stem of the pumpkin's gone brown and the vine's completely died off, they can store in your cellar for up to 12 months, depending on the variety. Now, I did deliberately choose varieties that were only a few kilos rather than the really big ones because I knew that too much weight would pull this panel over. But I think it's a great idea to grow them vertically as well as taking up space on the ground. Now, this climbing vegetable is called quigua or a chocha. It's a clambering thing and it fruits late in the season, but it produces these pods that are rather like cucumber. If you eat them when they're young, you can eat them seeds and all, but as they get older, you actually need to scrape out the dark coloured seeds. Now, I struggle with cucumbers here because of the salty bore water that I have to water with. Yet this plant does really well. And again, it clambers up to a couple of metres high in a flash. It's a great, interesting, unusual climbing veggie. Of course, you can get climbing tomatoes too. They're called indeterminate varieties, which means that they can grow quite tall if you train them. This one is one of my favourites. It's called tomato, which is reputed by some to have the best flavour of any tomato. Now, the one thing about growing tomatoes as a climber is in the heat of summer when the temperature's over 35 degrees, they might need a bit of shade cloth over them. But apart from that, they're great valued climbers too.